Oh, okay, I'm not hearing your audio. There you are.
Here we are. Welcome to GMIHub Live. It is so good to be here. We've had a couple weeks off. It's been nice. And so we're going to continue off where we tried last month to talk about Daws. So much going on with it that we'll dive in just a minute. But I'm going to actually refer to a program I watched the other week, and it basically said one of the best ways to get viewers to continue watching you is to give them what the ending is all about and what's going to happen at the end. So I'm actually going to tell you what we're probably going to conclude with, and that is, it doesn't matter. Just get on and choose a DAW and just do it. So, and that's the finale. So right. We ask you to stay and continue to watch what we're going to be talking about, because it actually gives you the reasons why and how and everything else about DAWs, and not everything, but what we can cover in our short amount of time on selecting a DAW and choosing it, and the idiosyncrasies and what we perceive of them.
And I'm Cheryl. I'm just here to be a pretty face and listen to this conversation about digital audio workstations. But you know what? I am so glad that Christian Stonehouse, all the way from Alberta, producer and guitar maker, and yet he's very familiar with DAWs, is here to share his thoughts on that. Thank you so much for being here, Christian. So good to have you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
It is.
So okay, I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of the girl who's not recorded herself. I know that DAW means digital audio workstation. Am I right?
That is correct. Digital audio workstation.
See, I'm doing good so far. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was trying to look up how many, what different types of DAWs are out there. And it seems like what there's, first of all, there's a lot. And secondly, I guess there are sets of DAWs that do different things for different people. Is that what you find too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you have is you've got different manufacturers that sort of speak to a different part of different people, right? So some digital audio workstations are highly focused on creating a loop-based type of sound. So it's all about the composition of having something that's very much loopable. So you could play a thing in that goes dun, 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 and that's all you need to do, and it'll automatically keep looping that dun, 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 without you having to do anything. It's just built. And so for people who think like that and who want to make music that's very kind of like hook-based and repetitive, there's digital audio workstations that are just honed in for that type of purpose. Then there's people that are more, rootsy, and they want to record their acoustic guitar in a live performance over 6 minutes with just their voice, and they don't want any fancy bells and whistles. They don't want it to try and loop around and do strange electronic things. They just want to be able to record. So for that purpose, there's slightly different digital audio workstations.
And digital audio workstations are hardware and software based, is that right?
Well, that's a good question. Generally speaking, the digital audio workstation is always software. Typically, a hardware-based recorder would be called that. It would be called a hardware-based recorder many times. Like the fact that it's an audio, don't quote me on this, because I'm sure that there's some manufacturers that maybe have made an outboard one that's not in the computer and they still call it a DAW. That's quite possible. The ones that I'm familiar with are always on a computer, but that doesn't mean there's lots of ways to record audio tracks. So there are external boxes that do it as well. So they could use that terminology possibly. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah.
So now you're a producer, so I'm sure you have certain DAWs that you use or you have a preference for. What DAWs do you use?
Well, I'm pretty familiar with most of the big players. I've worked a lot with, very, very familiar with Pro Tools because I've been working in it most of my adult life. Logic Pro, Cubase 10, I've spent a fair amount of time with. And GarageBand just more because I have clients that use it a lot, and so I end up needing to know it as well. A little bit of Ableton Live. And so most of the main players I've worked with. There's a couple others out that are quite highly revered, and that would be Studio One by Personas. Is very highly rated and reviewed by the people that use it, as well as so is Reaper. Reaper is one of those, I think for $60 you can get in, and it's extremely powerful program. Both of those programs are really kind of touted as being low, what's the word? Low headache, low drama. Just get in and do your recording, and it's very simple. Don't crash a lot. So there's lots of options out in the market. You could easily compare it to car manufacturers, probably. You know, it's like there's lots of different ones, and there's a few main players everybody knows. So,
Okay.
but yeah, there's definitely different strengths with each one. So,
What have you found the differences between the different ones you've used? What are some of the strengths you have seen?
well, you've got some really important things that you don't know necessarily are important at the beginning, but if I might end up just coming back and using the car manufacturer analogy because it's important. Some people think about before they buy a car, they think about how long is this car going to be on the road? Like after 250,000 kilometers, am I going to need to be starting to change out major things on this car? And, you know, as we learned from companies like Toyota and Nissan and Honda, well, they showed that they could build a car that was very stable. I'll use that word. Okay. So got you from A to B, and maybe not everything was always the fanciest, but man, did that car ever just get up and keep going every single day. And so they made a name for themselves so much that they obviously got the American manufacturers really struggled to make sure that they could keep up, right? So it's no different in the digital audio workstation world. You've got a lot of people that when they've done a lot of recording, they would say the stability of how that software acts is ultra important. For some people, that's more important than having fancy features. Knowing that when they hit record that there's not going to be any glitches, no different than when we're doing a Zoom call and people drop out and you see, or even on the news, you see people, they're dropping in and out of their Wi-Fi or their cell data, you know, while they're trying to do a news broadcast. Stability. Like we all want that, right? But it's how much we value it as to really which D.A.W sometimes we're going to pick. So
I'm going to jump in here because you're talking about
Yeah.
stability. Is that a software or is that a
Uh-huh.
hardware thing? Because I could have a really stable program, but if my hardware, if I got a $250 laptop, which is not stable, is that a bigger problem versus the software then?
Great question. Great question. It usually is, it's a harmonious affair between two items, really, because they both have to react, you know, properly to each other and understand each other. And of course, case in point, so Pro Tools, which historically has kind of, it's taken a lot of hits for being a little bit buggy and crashing at times over the years. I personally have had way more good experiences with it than bad experiences. Now, having said that, I was using on my Mac, I was using Pro Tools 20, I think it was called 2018. And you pay like a monthly fee, and it's quite expensive, really. It was like $40 a month, basically Canadian, to upkeep that. And I know that I was at least like a operating system or two behind. I knew that at the time. Like I was, whatever it is, Mac OS 10.14 or something like that. I was at least a couple behind what everyone else was using out around me. But my Pro Tools was just absolutely stable as all could be. I never had a crash for a whole year. It was just rock solid. And here I'm doing albums and all kinds of stuff, audio almost every day. And so when people would say online, I'd read commentary about, oh, Pro Tools is buggy, it crashes. I don't know why you guys keep sticking with it, you old dinosaurs. And I would just, I didn't get in there and make a big deal about it. I just thought, well, that's weird. I don't have that issue. And so that's why I stick with mine. Okay, so fast forward to a scenario where I was working on a Final Cut Pro video project with a friend, and I needed to, long story short, I needed to update my Pro Tools. Oh, look at this. Look who we have on board.
Hey, Daryl. This is
Mr.
Daryl
Smith is
Smith.
here. Right on.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, glad you could join us. We're talking about good old DOS DAW software. Just before we continue talking about DAW, are you still in Seattle or have you moved back to Vancouver?
I'm in Los Angeles right now.
Los Angeles, okay.
Yeah, we're moving to Victoria, BC next month.
Okay. So for those of you who watch on a regular basis, Daryl Smith here is married to Noreen, who we've had on a number of time talking about our vocals. So it's glad that he can actually make it.
Yay!
My dad, I've never reached out to you as Christian. He said, hey, I'll get Daryl to come in. He'll do it for me.
He's awesome.
So glad that you can make it.
Yeah, you're well worth interrupting my story, D.
Sorry, buddy.
I'm so glad to see your face, man. It's always a pleasure. Right on. Where was I? We were talking about stability and of digital audio workstations, Daryl. We were talking about like why people would choose different D.A.Ws and what would make them kind of want one. And I was telling them my experience with Pro Tools 2018 on like an OS that was like probably 2 versions old, and how stable it was for like a whole year and whatever. And so my Final Cut Pro, I was sharing a library with a buddy, and I was like 1 digit behind his. And so it told me, I can't open this library, I need the newer version of Final Cut Pro. So I went to just kind of update the latest ones, like, oh, you can't do that on this version of your Mac OS software. You're going to have to. So I went to 10.15, fast forward, and then I thought, well, I'll just go to now Pro Tools 2020. And I'm still 1 version behind on the Mac software. Everything's going to be okay. And then the crashes begin, right? So then I'm just having a crash every day or every second day. And it started to slow down now because I've slowly started to, figure out what it was. But to your point, like, yes, it's this relationship and a dance between software and hardware. Daryl D. Smith, that's what Daryl was asking me. He was saying, how much does your hardware, your computer play into the stability of these things? But yeah. So yeah, that's, so stability is a huge thing. And yes, they're finding software that does what you want it to do. But then there's other people that prioritize having fun on it and making it be really interactive, so you can be super creative on the fly really quickly. And when one app that would probably come to mind, D, you could give me your thoughts on this, but like something like Ableton Live is pretty creative and gets you going with sounds and things really quickly, lets you build tracks very quickly in sort of a performance looping sort of style. But jump in there, D. You have any thoughts?
I do. I'll tell you what.
Yep.
Depending on your workflows and how you like to make music, you're really going to lean towards different platforms, right? It also has a lot to do with who you're collaborating with. If you're collaborating with people and everybody's in Logic, work in Logic. I mean, that's just the end of it. Forget there's all sorts of people making records entirely in Logic with only Logic plugins, and they're doing it because they just want to be fully compatible with their collaborators. So it's a simple decision. Go with the workflow that's going to work for you. I love writing in segments. So I came up on Ableton right from version 1. And all the music I've ever written started in Ableton. Now, I can't finish it in Ableton because Ableton doesn't give me the kind of mixing experience that I want. Of course, I'm almost 50. I grew up on consoles and outboard and biasing 2-inch tape. So maybe I'm looking for a mix environment in Pro Tools that's more familiar for me and it's going to let me be more productive. For my son, he doesn't care. He
Right.
makes stuff in Fruity Loops. He makes stuff in
Yeah.
Ableton. He makes stuff in whatever. Doesn't even cross his mind, Christian, to add EQ to things. It's just
Yeah.
not part of his process. So, we support clients who are working in Ableton, touring acts in Ableton. We support touring acts who are using Logic. Of course, there's some running out of Pro Tools. Usually, they've got two systems if they are.
Mhm.
And it's all good. I like tracking in Pro Tools, but I think it's because it speaks to that analog world that I grew up in.
Right.
The only thing I think I would say this would be a contravesty is a word I didn't make up, but I like to say, is that there's a contingency of folks out there who really love Reaper and really love free open source stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to argue with them about that, because if they're into that,
Mhm.
there's no going back. But I found that since the creative process is something that works best when we're in the creative flow, which means we're relatively undistracted from the music, from the sound, uh, and not distracted by all the technology bells and whistles or things that can go wrong. So my recommendation for
Right.
my clients is get on a platform where the technology kind of fades in the background and you can lose track of time and make great music and not be
Right.
all like teching it. So to me,
Mhm.
that means I've got a computer with tons of power. I've got all the crayons and plugins. I got all that stuff working on a whole other day, not on a production day. And now I'm coming to the studio to make music, do what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to tech today. So that means I want something that's stable, that's capable. I don't want to be trying to make my 386 computer work,
Yeah.
Not today. Today's for me.
Totally.
So there's my every thought I've ever had about D.A.Ws in one.
Yeah, that's
speech.
great. That's really good. I love it.
That's so. Let's do this because we're kind of still talking about the hardware. What's the difference between PC and Mac for this? Oh,
Honestly, like, to make the conversation pretty short, I feel like I mean, I work with clients on a daily basis on PCs. I work with people on Macs most of the time, but I'm back and forth. You can get it done on either. Like, I work with a guy mixing his songs all the time on Cubase 10, where he's got a really decked out, basically a gaming machine that's really souped up, and his son like tweaks it and makes sure it's all really dialed in, and generally speaking, it's stable. It doesn't have any issues, and I don't have a lot of problems with it. But here's the thing that people forget: like, if you aren't going to pay as much on the front end for the hardware, and let's just think of it in those terms. Let's not think of it Mac and PC as much as I'm spending more on the Mac brand. Essentially, what you're trading off, generally speaking, in my experience of doing this for a while, I think Daryl would agree with me, but generally speaking, you're trading off dollars. So you say, I'm going to save $500 on this. But what you're going to do is you're going to actually need to put more of your own time into it more often over the years than you do on a Mac. Like, this Mac I have right here doesn't ever cause me any grief. It's 5 years old and it's just always running all the time. And I do everything on it. I do audio, video editing, like 4K editing, the whole thing, every kind of mix, multiple tracks, all that stuff. So my point is like, I do find quite often, so that digital audio workstation I was telling you about on the PC, like, that's my friend's probably fourth incarnation since I've started working with him in about 2.5 years. So he got the first machine and not everything was working. So ordered another graphics card, and then he got another, his motherboard, ran out of, it's died about 1.5 years in. So he got another. So he's willing to trade his time to save $500 or $1,000. At the end of the day, it's all about what you value. And if you're more of a geeker and tweaker and you don't mind doing that, then you can learn the machine. But back to Daryl's point, still, you'd still best to be testing it for an hour the day before you're going to get creative, because nobody wants an instability in the day that you're supposed to be making some great music, right?
Okay, and I know Daryl has some opinions on the whole Mac PC thing. I want to hear these. I saw his reaction.
Yes.
We're going to get roasted alive for having this conversation, first of all. Yeah. So the truth is this. Someone out there can make anything work. And some folks out there are just so delighted to build their own system, and, they're tinkerers and they want to customize it and dial it in. And, they're so convinced this is going to be the way to go. And I've just come to respect them and say, like, that's not what I would recommend to people I know and love. But if that's your thing, go get it done. If we were having a conversation about video, and honestly, Christian and I have probably spent hours talking about this, but it's like OBS people. If you're a video guy, if like OBS is the way for you to get it done, God bless you. Like, go forth and multiply. But there's plenty of us for whom, Wirecast or an ATEM switcher
or
is just
vMix.
going to be this, vMix is, I think, a whole other class, but, is the way to get it done. So when it comes to music production, again, I would say that of 100 computers that we've installed with clients, 90 of them are, if they're related to audio or ProPresenter or video production, it's a Mac. If it's a lighting desk, it's generally a PC. I just, I feel out of control on PCs in terms of them pushing updates about drivers getting out of sync. And it's a challenge enough on Mac. And actually, I will say some of the emotional connection that maybe Christian and I have to Mac is probably 5 years old. Like, with all the new work that they've done around privacy, having your Mac up and running is exponentially more difficult in 2021 than it was in 2018. We just did the latest Avid upgrade for a client who was running an HD native IO, and Avid scripts couldn't load that driver. And we had to go in and do crazy stuff in like, safe mode and get into the kernel and switch things on for Avid. So
right.
It's getting harder, but yeah, for me personally, for anyone I recommend a Mac. I just think it's a more integrated, tighter platform. You're going to deal with less hardware crankiness and issues. And the new M1s are ridiculously powerful. So for $699 or a little MacBook Air, you have a beast of a machine. So I think Mac, now that they're on their own processors, has really struck the final blow on the whole debate of what's a better value. I think they've really solved that problem. And so going forward, it can be, a personal preference. But man, if you're anyone that I love, I would be working pretty hard to land you on a Mac.
Yeah.
Was that helpful? I can't tell sometimes when I start talking if I'm actually helping anybody or not.
See, I'm from old school. Like, I know, Daryl, we haven't chatted in, we'll say, years. We'll just leave it at that. And I grew up on PC. Actually, I remember using Mac. I went to PC, and my PC always blew away the Mac guys. But I also spent the same amount. Like most people who buy PCs, cheap out and buy cheap PC, and then they try and do a comparison. So, but it's like you do Mac to PC. I haven't tried it anymore. I'm still on $250 laptops. We'll leave it at that. But it's what I always go Apple, same price PC, same price Mac. What's better? What's not better? And again, with all the changes with the Mac that they're doing nowadays, it will be interesting to see how things are going, because I know Waves is coming up with all new stuff, and it's all shifting. So it'll be interesting next year how that all falls out.
Cheryl, is this Cheryl here?
Yes, hi.
What do you run for a computer?
I run what he gives me.
It's a $350 laptop.
Just depends what he gives you. That's good.
So now we get to make a value judgment. What did he give you?
It is an Acer. It is about 7 years old. She's had it for about 7 years. Mine's newer, but mine's an Acer, and it's about $250. So hers is more when we got it. So
Right.
But yeah,
All right.
Trust me.
Well, my wife.
Uh-oh.
Marian's running an i5 MacBook Air, and I think I just put my daughter, who's a graphic artist, on a new M1 because some of the core apps from Adobe she's using run on it now. And then my other two kids are hardcore gamers, so they're both on pimped out like 10 core, 3080, 3070 graphics card gaming machines, which is more powerful. Like I've got a vMix rig at the office that's powerful, but they're both crushing anything I've got. So it makes me laugh. Yeah. Anyways.
That's funny.
But DAWs work, okay, so are you saying then that the DAWs work, in your opinion, better on Macs than on PCs, or are they available on both?
They're available on both, and it would be hard for me to quantify scientifically that they work better on Macs. What I believe I've observed through, tens of thousands of hours of observing musicians and producers create music is that humans work better on Macs.
Wow, well said.
Yeah.
That's an interesting discussion. So we'll continue kind of down the line, not so much Mac PC, but how often do you have to upgrade a computer or a whole new version? Because you're talking, I know there was Pro Tools HD, and then I think that you said that they came out with a whole new upgrade. How often do they do that? And then how long do they keep the old software available for? And then do you always have to upgrade your plugins that go with that? Because I know there's been a lot of grief and complaints about that online about buy new plugins now.
Yeah. D, you want to take this one? Yeah, go ahead, D.
The bad news is the whole industry has moved towards annual updates and subscription.
Yeah.
Basically moved to subscription model. So if you're on Pro Tools, just regular Pro Tools, I think it's $200 a year. If you're on Ultimate, it's like $500 or $600. But my recommendation for all of my clients, again, if you're actively in a project, don't upgrade your OS or your version of Pro Tools until you're done the project. Now,
yeah,
I'm working on a project that spanned over 20 years, so I've been through many updates. But if you're like a normal person, working on something for 6 to 9 months, but I recommend to my clients that they do the sign on to the subscription and stay up to date with the latest. Because what's happening right now is like when Apple or Microsoft puts out an OS, the developer needs an OS update. The developer's working around the clock to bring their code base up to sync up with that. So it's highly required. And then when it comes to plugins, plugins like Waves right now isn't M1 compatible on the Mac side. They're working on it. We don't know how long it's going to take, but so it's complex. And sometimes I've got a few studio clients that just rely on me to help them know when to do that big upgrade, and I'm sure Christian goes through the same thing too, right? Like you got to kind of get an OS, a new version of the DAW, and then all your plugins all lined up before you take that step forward. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I think it's funny because sometimes, as technical as we are and we live, there's times that I have a lot of the software I use it can be very expensive and a very unique tool. I'm not talking about the digital audio workstation itself. I'm talking about one of the plugins within it. So there's a handful that I could say arguably I couldn't live without. With it, there's lots of stuff that you can do with built-in plugins, okay? But there are some third-party plugins where I just go, oh man, I don't know if I could live without this. One would be, not to pitch, I'm not endorsed by anybody. So one would be, for instance, Daryl would understand this, like the Isotope Restoration Suite. Like if there's any noise reduction stuff needed, we hopefully don't have noise coming in. But if there is, like I'm doing a podcast with lawyers all over North America, and every single boardroom, generally speaking, at an office is got HVAC blowing in, and it's super nice boardroom, but it's always echoey. There's always really lots of hard flat surfaces. So I'm having to deal with, oh man, this HVAC noise or the street noise, or there's hum or whatever. Anyway, so there's a couple things that, so my point is that the plugins sometimes are so old, and I will push it. And this is push it in that I'm using a really old plugin with new software only because I can't afford the $600 right now to upgrade. So I will try and use the older plugin, and a lot of times it'll still work. Like, but having said that, yeah, like I think the oldest single individual plugin I have on my machine was coded in about 2014, which is pretty old. And I'm surprised it works because it's 2021, 7 years old, but there's a couple that are like that, and it does. So yeah, but I mean, so it brings us to the point, like, so with third-party stuff, if you really get where you have a lot of them in your sessions, where you have lots of different plugins that are third-party ones, you end up starting to rely on them. So back to Daryl's point, you end up being forced to update them and paying for whatever model, because you really love them, and so you end up having to pay whatever they want when it's time to upgrade, if that makes sense. Some are different than others. Like Universal Audio, you buy it once and their stuff's amazing, and you buy it once and you always have it. Now it's not cheap, but when you buy it, they don't ever take it away from you, so you've always got it to use. So you can always keep updating as, all the software as needed.
Okay. So, we just jumped into plugins here. Does somebody want to explain to some of our audience who may not know what a plugin is?
Yeah, Daryl does. Oh, your audio's muted.
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, there you go.
So back in the day, when Christian and I were wee lads, we'd go into the studio, and there would be three or four kind of main components of the studio, right? There'd be this big, lovely mixing console. Of course, today, if you go into a studio, that's the thing that the producer sits his laptop down on top of. Doesn't actually really use them as a mixing console much anymore, but they're a lovely part of the studio. There was like microphones and speakers, kind of the things you would imagine at a studio. There was some sort of a tape recorder that you would multi-track on and maybe print your master bus to. And then there was all this cool outboard gear. And this was all the great big shiny toys that they'd run your vocal channel through or your drums through, that would give you like reverb sounds and would sort of tune your vocal or your instrument to sound really great, or maybe compress the dynamic range to make it fit in the mix better. And they were all individual pieces of equipment that all cost $3,000, $4,000, $10,000 or whatever, right? And huge racks of gear with tubes in them and all sorts of things, generating tons of heat and taking up all this space. And if, for a good time, you can go look at, a mix magazine or maybe a Mix of the Masters, and you can see that some of these guys still have racks and racks and racks of outboard gear that they'll run through. Well, the modern version of all that are these things called plugins, and they sit in line in your DAW on the channel strip, and they behave like, in some cases, that old gear, and sometimes even try and look a bit like it. And then sometimes they do things that the old gear could never do because of the limitations of electronics or tubes. They do totally new and fresh sounds, So it's a huge range. I think of plugins, I think some of them are like core tools. Like if you were gardening, you know, you're going to have a spade and you're going to have a shovel, you're going to have some core tools, but a lot of them are just super creative and really help you get specific sounds. And the last plugin I bought was the Wolf Compressor.
Right.
And it is modeled after the compressor algorithm in the old Roland SP404 sampler. And Roland probably never meant to do something amazing with the compressor. It was probably, they only had so much lines of code and they squeezed something in. But this compressor does something magical. So the guys at Wolf had it modeled and have shared it. And it was a completely emotional $149 purchase. I have a dozen great compressor plugins, but I wanted, that's what I perceived was that unique sound. And it's kind of cool. I don't know that I'd recommend it for everybody. If you know who you know, the frequent flyers are or Wolfpack is, then you probably already have it. But that's kind of it. So it's like crayons. You know, I buy plugins to expand the palette and to give me different things. And then there's a whole other conversation that Chris is much more dialed into, and that is now, you know, like we could take a plugin like the SSL channel strip. So Waves has a version, a different version they did with Chris Lord Algae.
Right.
You know, Plugin Alliance has a version. That's my favorite. Universal Audio has a version. And so now we're in this place where there's 3 or 4 takes on the same thing. And some engineers will like the UA one, and some engineers will like the Plugin Alliance one, and on it goes. So not only do you have all these plugins now to replace all that outboard gear, but you've got all sorts of different takes on the same thing.
Is there sound difference between the different plugins companies for the same thing?
Slightly, yeah.
It's subtle, you know. It would be subtle, but
it's subtle most of the time.
The whole thing of sound production really lies in the last 5 or 10% anyways. So all that subtle can add up.
Yeah. But yeah, well, there's a lot of plugins that you're right that take it from 85% to what we would maybe call 100. I mean, to get that 15%, we're probably dropping like 30 to 50 plugins on a session, right? Like, so we're talking,
I would argue, Christian, that like somebody like you is a phenomenal mix engineer. You live in that last 15%. Like when you get somebody's song that they've recorded all their parts and perfected their vocal, it's that last chunk, that last day of effort takes it from something rough to something finished, you know? So that's the domain you're existing in. And so, yeah, your preference of what version of the SSL could really make a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, but you said something earlier with regards to, and this is a key thing to take note of. So Daryl said that, you know, some people will buy a digital audio workstation and they'll just use all the plugins that come with it. And this is important point to probably make for all the listeners that don't do this all the time. Where we've come in 2021 is so far different than what the world was like in the year 2000. Like I used my first digital audio workstation was 1993. And so they've come a long way since then. And so, well, actually Daryl might even be 91 or something with Performer, right? Yeah, Performer, whatever it was. So the plugins, all the manufacturers in general have all taken and borrowed from each other. Like if they test out the newest version of the other guys, wow, his transient designer here on this, or whatever it might be, the way they deal with their vocal time stretching, well, they all start doing it. They all get their programmers, their DSP engineers to copy. And so it gets to the point where all the plugins are really so good within Cubase, within the built-in ones within Reaper, within Logic, within Pro Tools, within Ableton. I mean, all of these guys you can get the job done. And so arguably, someone that has really well-refined ears can get that 15%. A lot of times I'd say you could probably get at least 10 to 12 of that 15% with all the built-in plugins if you know what you're doing. There's going to be people that might argue that, but the point is there's a lot of tools under the hood. I had an experience one time where it was kind of a profound experience where I met up with another sound engineer in Toronto after we had done our show, and he was mixing Tom Cochrane at the time, and I can't remember what song was on. And I shook his hand, and I just met him for the first time. I was with the stage manager buddy of mine, and he's like, "Oh, come hang out with him for a bit at front of house." I'm like, "Sure, let's do it." So I sat there and I was looking at what you would call Pro Tools live rig. It really was like it was a profile, which is basically like Pro Tools digital audio workstation for the live mixing engineer. And I was looking on his screen, and I was kind of surprised to see that there was no third-party effects plugins. There was no like waves compression or anything else going on. He was all just using the internal Digidesign Avid effects that came with the box, and he had lots of different things going on. And I also remember in the moment going, this was a really nice mix. Like I was really captivated and pulled into this Tom Cochrane performance, who I don't even know tons of his work. I know some of it, but and I remember thinking to myself in that moment, wow, this sounds really, really good. And this is also not like how I would mix it. And that moment was one of those times in your life where you go, and then I flipped it back on its head and I said, but it actually sounds really good. And so I left it at that, and being okay with the fact that it didn't need to sound like my ears. There was a couple things I would have gone in and tweaked right away, but I had to stop myself and say it didn't matter. It sounded good. It felt good. It was emotionally connecting with me, and it was different than I would do it, if that makes sense. Bit of a rabbit trail there.
I love those rabbit trails. That's the little nuggets.
Okay.
But I've been doing a fair bit of audio over the last little bit because of COVID.
Yeah.
And people keep talking to me. I say, you know what? I keep it at the very basics. If you can't get the basic mix, you're just adding more polish to something that doesn't sound good. Keep it simple, right? And when you can start getting above that, then start adding in more effects and verbs and delays and go crazy on stuff. But there's all that sort of stuff. But it's interesting when you're talking about the plugins on the big pros in Canada. They're touring all the time, and it's just use what's there. Just use what's there. The garbage in, garbage out. Good drums, good sounds. So,
yeah, you certainly can, definitely, and that's back to this whole thing of a capable person who's very refined at their skill set can do some pretty wonderful things with pretty rudimentary equipment. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to the sounds of the plugins, do the Daws themselves each have a different sound? Like, does Pro Tools have a different sound than like what a Reaper would sound?
I'll let Daryl answer this one. Your turn, buddy.
You're such a jerk. So I think that somebody out there can articulate and perhaps even show some sort of scientific process to measure the difference. It's been a long time since anyone tried this because now a lot of the IO boxes that you would use at a studio level have really great clocks in them, and a lot of stuff is everyone's doing 56-bit floating or 32-bit mix engines and all of the tricks that, like Christian said earlier, all the best practices have been spread across everything now. So
that's true.
It all sounds pretty good. I would say that and to Christian's point, oh my gosh, we have this friend, Joby Baker, on Vancouver Island. He's a prolific Canadian producer. And I remember 30 years ago, Joby on a Roland VS880, which was like barely a 16-bit recorder, 44.1,
Right.
terrible mic preamps, terrible EQ, like just horrible.
Yeah.
He recorded a record that I think if it had been submitted for a Grammy would have won it, in a 10 by 10 room with a handful of crappy mics.
Right.
So I think it's honestly like
Mm.
the tools are tools. If the performance is great, if you've captured it well, and you know the room or there aren't noise issues or whatever, you've got a good clean performance.
Yeah.
You might get all the way over the finish line without having to apply any plugins. And you know, I've watched a lot of Mix with the Masters. I'm often blown away at how many tracks. If somebody's got 100 sessions, 100 channels open on a session, 100 tracks. There might be 30, 40 tracks where nothing is applied. There's no need for anything to be applied in
Right.
terms of plugins or whatever, grease or, you know, what have you. So I think where a lot of people start to make mistakes is they start going, oh, this is what the pro would do. I got to put all this junk on here and it's going to make it better.
Right.
And that's not the case, you know?
Mm.
Same thing, like we could talk about microphones and I would say, like, if you're interested in recording your vocal and you don't know what microphone to buy, start with the Shure SM7.
Right.
You know, for $300, maybe get a little cloud lift or something to give it a little boost, and a low cost IO box like a Focusrite Scarlett or something. You can get
World class
to a world class vocal without spending a lot of money. So do that, as opposed to what I see a lot of people do, which is they go out and they get like the MXL $90 microphone because they believe it's all they can afford, and then they start trying to fix it in the mix and are frustrated they can never get it to ever really get them the outcome they want.
Right. And then they spend hours and hours on social media going, how do I get my vocal to sound as big and as warm as all, and then they'll, but they keep talking about it over and over. You see the same guys posting, I just need my vocal to get fatter, and you're like, okay, what are you using? Yeah, I'm using that $90 MXL and I'm trying to get this, as an example, but I'm trying to get that $600 sound or $1,000 sound out of it. Well, to Daryl's point, I mean, arguably that $500 well spent with an SM7B and a decent interface is going to give you well over $1,000 sound, no problem.
Yeah,
like easily. It's just that,
and
great place to start.
To that point, like if we can just zoom out for a second, I'm kind of taking you off that. You're asking really amazing questions, like really focused discussion. But it, you know, from my point of view, one would be better to get themselves a little Mac Mini, run Logic for $200, and then get a decent IO box and a decent microphone. You know, that's going to be a way better core package than getting too fancy with anything else. And you'll probably get farther down the road creatively just with some really great quality core tools than trying to cut corners or even get fancy, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll have to disagree with you here, and Christian, I think you'll agree with me. You have to get one of the Lewitt microphones.
There you go, the Lewitt stuff.
Lewitt has some great product.
They do. That's right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that because Christian both sell. We can sell you the Lewitt microphone. So
that's right. Well, Daryl can sell us any microphone, and he's.
But so since you went down the path of getting the little rig for, call it $500-600.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on a rig that somebody who's an entry level should be looking at getting? I know Daryl's already touched on it a little bit. Christian, I'll let you have your say.
Well, I think we both agree. We've chatted with each other. I mean, there's a couple products. I mean, it's changing all the time. Honestly, every 6 months, there's new manufacturers that come up with great new products. And there's some small, if you want to call it small players in the game with great big sounds. Up and new coming companies like Audient and Antelope Audio and other smaller companies that aren't the Focusrite, they're not the Universal Audio, but they're also making consistently great sounding products for very cost effective. And I mean, I think the big catch is if someone's going to go in and set up a recording scenario for themselves in a D.A.W, it's understanding how many inputs, how many channels they'd want to record all simultaneously. It's a really important thing to think about at the beginning, because if you know for sure that you're going to want to record acoustic guitar and you're going to want to sing at the same time, and you are always going to want to have your partner who plays cello, and the three of you are always going to play at the same time, you can't just get a Focusrite Scarlett that has two inputs for $200. It's just not going to work. But you'll try, you'll get it because everyone talked about it on the internet, and then you'll wonder why you couldn't. You're like, oh, well, if you want to record three, then you need to go now get an external preamp. And then you realize to get a good preamp, you're looking at another $1,000. And it just keeps going on and on. Right. Forget about it. Yeah. So it is one of those things where figuring out how many inputs ahead of time you think you might be needing or using is important. Focusrite's a big player in the game for the small, just 2 channels at a time. Universal Audio is a great product for just 2 channels at a time. They're either UAD Solo is one of them. For Focusrite, it's the Scarlett. I wouldn't want to leave out Apogee, who's been they started in this game many, many years ago and make also a really amazing front end for like really high fidelity. There's so many good players in the game. Mark of the Unicorn makes some great stuff. I mean, we're getting off the topic of D.A.Ws, but
no,
jump in here, Daryl.
The Zen Go is
great.
I mean, lots of people go for Universal Audio Apollos, so we have to mention it, or we'll just get beaten.
Yeah, I did mention UAD, Universal Audio. Yeah, that's right.
But that's not getting off the Daws, because we've never actually talked about, does the DAW actually record, or how do you get your whatever it is into the DAW? Because a DAW is a software product. You still need a hardware piece to get whatever you're doing into it, unless you're doing loops.
Well, that's where some of them set themselves apart, because that's maybe what's happened in the last 10 years or so is you've got the really good hardware manufacturers learned that they needed to have a basic interface to go into to record into your DAW. So like you could see basic levels, you could see basic adjustments of the channels and things like that going into your digital audio workstation. I won't throw anybody under the bus. There's a couple manufacturers who provided so many options on their little platform before you went into the digital audio workstation that was attached to their hardware, that when you clicked on that piece of software all by itself, it's so overwhelming. You could be in there for an hour and not understand why you couldn't hear your guitar. And someone like me who's been doing this forever can't figure out why I can't hear my guitar, only to realize one tiny little button on page 14 wasn't flicked on. Daryl, you've had this experience, and I'm not going to mention any manufacturers because some of them they've gotten better because they learned the hard way. But some of the software is still around because sometimes people are running old computers. And then I'm like, I'll load something and this guy will be like, I can't figure out why this isn't. And I'll jump on the software and go, oh my goodness, this is like the most troublesome connection between the hardware and the digital audio workstations. Focusrite made it really simple. They have a really slick and clean connection point. Universal Audio made it very simple, and a lot of the other manufacturers are doing the same thing. I don't know, Daryl, do you have any input on there?
Yeah. So there was a time in the 2000s when latency was a real issue. And so companies like Universal Audio did the world a favor by getting you some amount of plugins that you would want during tracking, like reverb and some basic EQ, compression, with a kind of a workaround. They would wrap around the D.A.W to give you a low latency monitoring solution that D.A.Ws were lacking unless you were heavily invested in hardware. So if you've got a $10,000-$20,000 Pro Tools rig, this has never been a problem.
Good
but as
point.
people went to native DAWs without additional hardware for processing, it became a problem. UA, Antelope, all sorts of folks jumped in to solve that. Now, today, it's not as much of a big of a deal. Like today, what we'll often do is just do direct monitoring through an audio interface. So you've got that super low latency version of yourself, but then in the DAW, we'll add some reverb and whatever else, and it's all good, you know?
Right.
So it's less of an issue today, Christian. I think that monitoring, like getting a performer, especially if you're the performer, getting to a place where you're comfortable performing is a big deal. And to me, that's worth investing in. You know, like the mix thing you can send out to somebody else. If you're not enjoying mixing your project, send it to Christian. You can't send out your vocal performance to Christian.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, actually, I think a few of his clients have, but for the most part, you know, he doesn't really sound like a girl that often.
Yeah,
you know?
that's right. It's hard.
It's harder. So
it takes a lot of great plugins.
It's got to be your performance, and getting a great performance really is about you getting to a place where you're comfortable. You can hear yourself. You can hear the track. You're emotionally connected. And if there's some latency or some garbage in there that's going to throw you off, just start throwing down the Benjamins to make that go away, because you don't deserve it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, go as cheap as you can, but don't compromise your own ability to do your best.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we've almost been on for almost an hour here. I'm going to ask a question, and that would be kind of, I guess, just to wrap this up here.
Yeah.
So somebody who wants to go out and spend $500, what are 3 things they need to do? And we won't get into the microphones and some of the other stuff, just the software. What is it that they're needing to look for to be able to purchase some software properly go for it?
I think both of us could give an answer. I'm not going to definitively recommend. There's no way I would recommend one company. I can say there's a couple different ways to go at it, but I do think that, back to Daryl's point, you really need to question how you like to create and what you're trying to accomplish when you record music. Daryl touched on a very, very important thing, and that is that collaboration in today's recording music world is actually at our fingertips everywhere. So not just collaborating on the mix, but collaborating on I need a Wurlitzer part, or, I need somebody who can play the drums really good. I don't have a big 20 by 20 drum room, but I do know somebody who does, and he charges $99 a song, and it's online, and he will send you do 3 revisions. I mean, this is the world we live in now. You can say, I kind of want it to sound like this, and you can send him an example. He'll send you back a version. You'll say close, but the bridge, I need it different. So anyways, my point is depending on what you're trying to achieve with your recordings, if you're trying to do everything, if you say, I want to record it in, I want to be a creator, I want to do lots of keyboard editing, and I want to create pads and stacks and sounds, and then you might want a solution that really helps you do that. And most of them will do the things that I just said, but it's really about finding one that works with your workflow. So like something like Logic, for instance, will pretty much do everything you need. There's a bit of a learning curve with Logic. Ableton is really fun and a collaborative tool, and one that is arguably a little bit more for people who are working around EDM, dance, hip hop, generally speaking. So again, even if you know what style you're working in, like a lot of the people, for instance, that I know that are true players of, like, let's say guitar or drums. I don't even want to use that analogy because it's not true. It's really gotten really hard to distinguish and say for sure you should use this. I think you can get there with many of them, really. And it's about finding your own bent within it. All these companies have demos of this stuff, right? Like you can try a week on any of them. I mean, my brother-in-law he never used a D.A.W, just started using Reaper like 3 months ago, and he's all over it. The paid version of Reaper is $60, and those that use it, and I'm not sure if he's on a Mac. I mean, this is the other thing too, and Daryl will back me up with this. Depending on which OS you're on, it's not always the same application, right? Like one can be a bit more stable or be a bit easier to use than the other on different applications. So I'm not going to say that one is better than the other, honestly. I mean, I love Pro Tools. I love creating in it. I can do MIDI editing in Pro Tools, but it's also very expensive. The downside of it, like I'm just paying the monthly subscription, and it's probably the most expensive model out there. It's $40 Canadian a month for me right now. And I mean, yeah, I could buy the perpetual yearly license or whatever, but then again, I'm doing this all the time. So what I love about Logic, I love that you pay once for $2.99, whatever it is. And Dee, back me up. I mean, Logic is arguably on the Mac is probably one of the biggest ones. It's not super hard to learn. So
yeah, and the majority of hit music right now is being written in Logic. I mean, it's just the tool that everybody's come up with, and so it's done. Yeah, for me, the five, like I steer people regularly away from GarageBand. I think GarageBand is a terrible distraction that just leads to incomplete ideas and roadkill. Spend the time, get into Logic, or if try a demo of Ableton, and you might just find from a workflow point of view that you really prefer to work in sections. If you're more of a songwriter and you're thinking like, okay, I'm going to knock out a verse now, Ableton's really amazing at doing that quickly, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a different workflow. But yeah, get yourself going in Logic. I apologize to everyone who knows and loves Reaper, but I cannot recommend it. I've got maybe 100 hours in it, probably not enough, but I don't think free is ever the right solution when it comes to creative tools. That would be like saying to a painter, you know what, just use your shirt as a rag and paint and do your best, right? Well, there's plenty of things you can paint with a rag, but there's also a lot of things you can't, So why constrain the tool for the artist? Get the right tool for the job. Fortunately for us with music production, for $1.99, you get just about every tool you could need.
Yeah.
And then get a decent microphone, whether it's a Lewitt or a Shure or any of the other brands of decent quality microphones, a decent vocal mic, I think spending $500 is like a Honda Civic of vocal microphones, right? It's not a big investment relative to the $20,000, $30,000 microphone that you hear on a lot of high-end records. And on it goes. And then a little IO, there's lots out there, anywhere from $200 to $500. So it would be pretty hard for me to get somebody going for $500. I just don't think it's enough of an investment to do anything more than just kind of mess around. And if you want to mess around with the built-in microphone on your phone, or
I was going to say, use your iPhone. I mean,
Christian and I have both mixed projects that were recorded on the built-in microphones. It happens.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I would say there you have it.
Well, I'm going to summarize it at the end with the way I started it, and then I'll let Cheryl close the whole entire night off. And it is just do it. Just grab something and start doing it. And now I'll throw it back to Cheryl to close it off.
Wow, this has been quite the conversation, but you know what? I'm so glad you were here to join us, and I'm so glad Daryl and Christian were able to spend time with us. Thanks so much, Daryl, for dropping in at very last minute.
You want to have some real fun? Get me and Noreen in the same one. That's what you go early.
Actually, you know what? We've actually been talking, and this should probably be an after the show thing, but we've actually been talking. We want to do couples in the ministry or in the entertainment industry, and how does it work?
I'll tell you what, we could do a whole one on how to build your in-ear mix as a vocalist with, considerations for like in-ears or wedges or what. We could do a whole jam on that.
Oh yeah.
That's such a tripping point for a lot of vocalists in the church. They get really worked up with a terrible monitor mix and are not giving their best as a result. So
okay, so that's a topic booked. We'll talk offline on the dates for that.
And you're one of the panelists.
There's no questions about that.
That's great.
That sounds like fun.
He's hooked in. Nice.
Well, for those of you who've been kind of jumping in on the conversation, we have been talking about Daws here with Daryl Smith and Christian Stonehouse. I know I haven't done a whole lot of these, but you've been watching GMIHub Online Studio Talk with Daryl Duke and Cheryl Duke here, but Daryl being the main host, I'm just here to be the pretty face. So if you want to find out more about GMIHub, please go to our website, gmihub.ca, where you'll find out all about the different projects and the different
Christmas compilation album.
Yes, our Christian.
Christmas.
One more time. Christmas compilation album that we are working on right now. We are looking for your submissions. If you are a songwriter, we are accepting submissions up to July the 31st. But to give you a kind of a sneak peek of what we're working on, if you tune into our Christmas in July special, which is happening on July the 25th at 4 o'clock on YouTube, and I'm going to try and get it also on Facebook and Instagram as well. I'm going to try. But if you want to tune into Christmas in July, you will hear a wonderful interview between two people that have been working on the Christmas album, and be pretty excited about some things that are popping up. So we look forward to that. As well, we have a newsletter. We like to celebrate you, whether you are a songwriter, an instrumentalist, a tech person, whatever. We want to celebrate you. So feel free to sign up to our newsletter. And the reason why is because, well, I'm not going to give away too much, but in the fall, we're trying to get some extra little perks happening for those of you who have signed up for us for our newsletter, not only just to get a newsletter, but to get some other perks as well. So go to our website, gmihub.ca, and you'll get all the information. You'll get a little page that pops up. Sign up. Just all you have to do is your name and your email address. There's no cost. It's totally free. And we'll send you tips on things that'll help you get further along in what you do with your writing, with just getting along in your music career. So I know the summer months have hit. I know that those of you who've been locked up in COVID are getting released and getting out there enjoying the sun. So we want you to enjoy that. And we are also doing the same thing, but we will be back again next month with another topic. Again, watch for details. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. If you're watching a repeat of this, share the link, share the experience. Because, even in this conversation, we talked about Daws, and I expected it to be more on, well, there was technical talk, but you know what? It boils down to you. It really does. It boils down to what you put into the DAW and what you want out of the DAW. So we want to celebrate you, and we look forward to having you back with us the next time we're on. But in the meantime, we're going to sign off.
We're going to sign off. So long.
Farewell. Avita. Okay. No, we're not going to do that. Okay. We'll see you next time. Bye.